council are present, our members of our jury and our alternates are present, and people may come to this witness.
People would call Susan Heckaman.
Yes.
Do you solemnly state the evidence you'll give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
See? Come forward. State your full name, spell it for the record.
It's Susan Heckaman, Susan Heckaman.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Heckaman. Who did you work for back in 2010?
Geist Companies,
And how long had you worked for them?
4 years.
What was your position at Geist Companies?
I was the assistant to the president, Jeff Martin,
And where is Geist Company located?
Streetsboro, Ohio.
Now, when you worked for that company and you were the assistant to the president, is that what you said? What were your responsibilities?
I did a lot of pre-bid.
Well, let me stop you back up for just a moment. Can you tell us what kind of a company Geist is?
They are a developer and a general contractor.
And tell us a little bit about what kinds of projects they do.
Geist Companies does takes a lot of buildings in Cleveland and restores them, does renovation, and they also do ground up projects as well. And they have an architects on staff, so they design them as well, and then they build them.
So tell us now a little bit about what you did.
Okay. So I would engage subcontractors to, when the drawings came out for their bids, I would help Jeff and arrange anything that he had to do. He traveled throughout the United States. We built buildings everywhere. When we had difficult issues with subcontractors, I would contact them and try and get them to perform their scope of work.
You mentioned Jeff. Who is Jeff?
Jeff Martin is the president of Geist Companies.
Now, in 2010, were you aware of a project on or around January or February of 2010 that Geist Companies was working on?
Yes.
And what project was that?
I don't even remember the name of the project.
Okay. As part of that project, though, were you looking at purchasing or having somebody create some fountains for that project?
That is correct.
Now, do you know or were you aware of somebody from your company contacting Joseph McStay?
Yes.
Did you personally contact him?
Initially, no.
Did you later contact him?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what that contact was with regards to.
I shouldn't say I talked to him personally. I tried to get a hold of him, and I wasn't able to contact him.
Okay, so prior to that, were you aware that he had a company?
No.
Who did you order fountains from?
The architects, designers ordered the fountains, and I got involved when there was a problem. When we couldn't get a hold of them, I was the point to keep pushing to get these things installed.
At some point, did you learn that that company was Earth-inspired products?
Yes.
Objection leading.
Was there a particular deadline in terms of when the fountains were needed?
Yes.
What was that deadline?
I don't remember the date.
Were you familiar with any of the payment arrangements that were made with respect to the fountains before there became a problem?
No.
To your knowledge, did your company ever receive an invoice for the fountains?
Yes.
Do you recall who that invoice was from?
No.
Would it refresh your recollection to take a look at that invoice?
Sure.
going to show you what's been marked as 768. Okay, can you tell me if you recognize that? Yes. Okay, and I'm also going to show you 769, and do you also recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to actually put this 769 up on the overhead first, and it should be on the screen just in front of you. Straight ahead in front, right there.
Oh, okay.
Right there. The monitor, I should have said,
Okay.
sorry.
If it works.
Okay, so do you recognize this? We just talked about this?
Yes.
Was this an invoice that your company received for the fountains?
Yes.
Now, you recalled, we spoke earlier, and you said you didn't recall an exact date that the fountains were needed by, but we have a shipping date in there of April 1st. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Now, this invoice basically indicates that the cost of the 2 fountains, there's a glare. Do you see that? Down at the bottom, it says the 2 fountains are $12,000.
Reading is objection.
Overruled.
Do you see that amount?
Yes.
Okay. And so based on your knowledge of what happened, did it appear that your company paid a 50% deposit on the fountains?
Yes.
So we see a date or the amount circled and some writing and a date of 2/24/10 on the bottom. Do you see that?
Yes.
And can you explain what that is?
Just look like it says all good.
Do you want to look at the original one?
I don't know what it says above it. Maybe it's because they're going to do a wire transfer. This is before, this invoice was submitted before I got involved.
Okay, well, let me have you take a look at it.
I'm sorry.
Objection, no foundation.
Steve.
Okay.
To your knowledge, did your company wire transfer money?
Yeah.
Overruled.
Do you know how much your company wire transferred?
For the deposit, it's right here. The $6,250.
At some point, did your company or did you learn that Joseph McStay was missing?
Yes.
How did you learn that information?
Making phone calls, trying to get a hold of somebody to get our water features. I believe it was a detective that told me. I don't remember.
Do you recall having any contact with the defendant or somebody by the name of Charles Merritt?
Yes.
What was your contact with him?
Again, just trying to get a hold of him for the water features. To find out where they were they done? Are they being shipped?
Do you know how you actually learned that Charles Merritt was somebody that you could contact with respect to those water features?
No.
Now, we saw that there was an April 1st date on that invoice. Did your company actually receive the fountains on April 1st?
No.
Did you have contact with the defendant later on after that?
Yes.
And was that regarding finances?
Yes. And to secure the water features.
Okay, can you tell us about the conversations you had with the defendant with respect to the finances?
Objection, foundation, as to who she spoke.
Overruled.
Assumes the tax not in evidence also.
Overruled.
She's not identified the defendant.
Overruled.
Go ahead, you can answer.
I had contacted Chase Merritt several times and didn't receive return phone calls. At one point, I finally got a hold of him, and there were several issues going on. At one point, he was in the hospital. At one point, the water features were here. There were so many details that I had written down, and there were times that he needed more money. I know we sent him more money several times just to get the water features.
Do you recall there being something unusual about somebody that he asked you to send money to?
Yes, he had asked me to send money to his wife.
And did he give you a dollar amount for that?
Yes.
What was that dollar amount?
I can't remember. A couple $1,000, maybe 4,000, I can't remember.
Okay. And did he also ask you to,
Objection, foundation and speculation.
Overruled.
did he also ask you to send money to any other place?
There was a time we had to send money to Walker Manufacturing because allegedly the water features were there and they needed to be paid.
Now, you indicated that you had a conversation with him as well about the fountains. Do you recall that?
Somewhat, yes.
Do you recall what he told you about the fountains in terms of where they were in their completion?
There were a couple stories. At one point, they were at Walker and we needed to pay the freight, I believe. And I think at one point they were in a warehouse. I don't remember all of it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You did talk to a detective about this case.
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
And when you spoke to the detective, you gave him information that you had regarding the case. correct?
Yes.
Do you remember telling the detective that the defendant told you the fountains were done and the crates were done and he was just waiting for a trucking company to pick
Yes.
them up?
Yes.
You objected to leading counsel testifying?
Sustained. If you want to show it in the court to refresh your recollection, to do that.
Did you have an opportunity this morning to listen to a phone call?
I did.
And what was that phone call that you listened to?
It was the conversation with the detective.
And did that conversation refresh your recollection in terms of what you had told the detective?
Yes.
And do you recall what you told him specifically that the defendant told you about when the fountains would be done? Or what was going on with the fountains?
Well, there were a couple stories. The one in particular were that they were ready to be crated and he needed additional funds to get them crated, I believe, and sent to Ohio.
And did your company provide those extra funds that he requested?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately when those conversations took place?
This was, I think, June-ish, spring, early summer.
Did you ever have any contact with Susan Blake regarding the fountains?
Is that Joseph McStay's mother?
Yes.
Yes.
And how was it that you came to contact Ms. Blake? Do you remember where you got her information
No,
from?
I'm sorry.
And you believe that it was sometime in maybe June or so that those conversations took place?
Yes.
Would it refresh your recollection to review that portion of the report that talks about the time frame?
Sure.
You can read the third paragraph,
Okay.
just to yourself.
Okay. Okay.
Did that refresh your
Yes.
recollection? Okay. And what was the time frame that those?
That was in May, early May.
And you indicated that at one point he had said he was in the hospital as well.
Yes.
Do you recall when that was?
It was after he said the water features were available, they just needed to be created and sent to us. And then shortly after, he said he was in the hospital, I believe, for a couple of weeks and would not be getting out, so we couldn't get the water features.
Now, at some point, did you have a conversation with your boss, Mr. Martin, about the difficulty with getting the fountains?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you do in terms of trying to get the fountains after that conversation?
I kept a record of every time I spoke to somebody within that organization. Each time a check was written, each time there was a conversation, there was an email, and Jeff had asked me to just get in contact with whomever I can to get the water features. We didn't want to start all over because we had a building to open for our clients, and we needed the water features to finish the building.
Is that when you got in touch with the San Diego Sheriff's Department?
Yes, my boss had asked me to do that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that the defendant had asked for additional funds. I'm going to show you what's been marked as 771 and see if you recognize this.
Okay.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Was that a document that you had received?
I don't know if we received it or if we created it so we could get the water features.
Okay, how do you recognize that then?
Because we had to have the water features put together, and I knew they were going to Northern Ohio Plumbing
Okay.
to get the water features put together.
So I'll put this up on the overhead. And can you tell us what this document actually is?
You're asking me to identify what the document is?
Yes, just tell us what this is about,
We-
or what it is.
We wanted to ensure that he was actually going to ship the, or give us, because eventually we sent somebody to California to pick them up, and that all monies would be received and we would receive the water fountains.
I have nothing further for this witness at this time, Your Honor.
Good cross.
Good morning, Matt. So initially, the contact from your company and Earth Inspired Products was with Joseph McStay, correct?
Yes,
But you didn't actually have that contact, correct?
that is correct. Jen Johnson did. She's the lead architect.
Okay. And then shortly thereafter, you had learned of, I guess, an invoice. Is that, and I'm gonna, it was exhibit 768 and 769 that counsel showed you, right? So let's take a look at 768 first, and I'm gonna put it on the screen. And if you, I get a better look at it because it's.
Objection, foundation?
Overruled.
So this is 769, but let me show you 768 first.
Objection, foundation?
Overruled.
We're going to get 768 up in a minute. All right. We'll start with 769. Okay, so 769. Now, on 769, it has a number at the bottom, and it says $12,750. Is that correct?
Yes,
And this was an invoice from Earth Inspired Products to your company, correct?
that is correct.
And the date of the invoice is February 2nd, 2010 in the upper right corner?
Yes,
Okay. But you don't know when this invoice was generated, do you?
I've seen this invoice when I got involved. I can't tell you what day it was created.
Objection, foundation?
Overruled.
My question is, you don't know when Earth Inspired Products would have typed up this invoice, do you?
No, I can't say I know when they typed the invoice.
What about the date that your company would have received this invoice? Do you know when that would have been?
No,
No?
no, I
Okay.
wouldn't know.
But is there anything on this invoice to show that your company paid the invoice to Earth Inspired Products?
Hence, says deposit receipt attached.
Okay. So, and you would have paid, and generally the instructions would be on, you would follow, that would be on the invoice, correct?
That
Like it
is
says
correct.
paid. Okay, so I'm going to direct you to the bottom of this invoice, and take a look. The copy's bad, so let me see if I can zoom in. Okay, does it say where to pay the $12,000?
Yes, to Dan Cavanaugh.
It actually misstates the
Oh, wait a
actual
minute.
document.
Read, go ahead and read it.
Overall,
That's what it says.
So your instructions were to pay Dan Cavanaugh that $12,000, correct?
I didn't instruct anybody to pay this, so I just want to be clear on that.
But those are the instructions to your company. I'm not saying that you did.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so, and your testimony was that you guys actually paid that $12,000, correct? Or
It actually misstates
$12,750?
testimony.
sustained.
You were expecting the waterfalls, right?
The water features, yes. At this point, we were to pay 50% of the water features.
Right, so let me go to 768. So exhibit 768, ma'am, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the date at the top. So it says 2/23/2010, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Is that yes?
Yes,
It says receipt for 50% deposit.
yes,
Okay, so we'll, and this is generated and it's sent to Geist Companies in Streetsboro, Ohio, correct?
yes.
All right, so let's go to the bottom again and see, and now this would be $62.50, which would represent 50% of the cost of the waterfall, correct?
Yes.
Okay, again, let's take a look and see where the payment instructions are. Can you see that at the bottom?
No.
It's a
It says
bad.
thank you for your business.
Okay, it's a bad copy. Let's see if we can do a better one. That's all we have? Okay. Do you know where this payment was sent to?
I'm reading this as a receipt. If you go back to the top, keep going, it says receipt for a 50% deposit.
Okay. So this is EIP, or Earth Inspired Products, saying that they got the $62.50, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And this receipt was sent to your company, correct?
yes.
Okay. Which means your company sent it. Do you remember when your company sent that $62.50, which would have been half the cost of the waterfall?
No.
Okay. I'm going to show you, see if this refreshes your recollection. This is a bank statement of Daniel Cavanaugh. If you can take a look at it.
Objection, speculation, foundation, lacks facts not in evidence.
Sustained on foundation.
Ma'am, you can take a look with the court's permission at that document to see if it refreshes your memory as to when your company sent the $62.50.
Objection, foundation, assumes facts not in evidence.
Well, she can look at anything to see if it refreshes the recollection, regardless of what it is. So the objection's overruled.
I wasn't part of this at the time. I mean, I can read here and tell you when this statement says that they received the deposit, but at that time, I didn't get involved in these water features.
But my question is, does that document refresh your memory as to when your company sent the $6,250?
Objection, foundation, assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled, she can answer if she has a recollection of when.
No, I was not part of the 50% deposit. The architect and designer, Christina and Jen, were part of that.
So you would not have any knowledge then, ma'am, of where the 50% deposit was sent and when, is that right?
That's correct.
And you wouldn't know when the second $6,250 was sent as to when it was sent and where it was sent, correct? That's not your...
At that time, I do believe I got involved in that timeline. If I had all my emails from back then, I could tell you.
Okay. But as far as you knew, you had, based on your conversations with Jeff Martin, the president, you knew that your company had paid for the waterfalls and
Yes.
were waiting for delivery.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And you didn't know where it was paid to. That wasn't kind of your
Not
area?
at that time, that is correct.
Okay. So you don't know whether Dan Cavanaugh gave any money to Chase to complete those, Chase Merritt to complete those waterfalls, do you?
Conversation with Chase that,
That's not my question, ma'am. My question is,
No.
do you know whether or not Dan
No.
Kavanaugh gave any of the $12,000 to Mr. Merritt?
no.
Now, when was, you said you had a conversation with Mr. Merritt. Yeah, we looked at those dates there. That was February, those two invoices, or whatever you want to call them, correct?
Yes.
One was February 2nd, and one was February 23rd.
Yes.
And when was the first time you had a conversation with Mr. Merritt?
I don't remember the exact date when I got involved. Like I said, if I had my paperwork, I would tell you. It was in the springtime.
If I showed you Detective Dugal's report,
Sure.
his interview with you, with that kind of...
Sure.
Sure.
So it would be, I guess, from here to here.
Okay.
And you're the unknown female at Guy's Construction, I believe.
So you're asking me when we sent the second wire transfer was
No,
made?
I'm asking you, when was the first time you contacted or had
Okay.
contact with Chase Merritt?
It looks like May 24th.
Okay. So your first time you had contact regarding this waterfall with Mr. Merritt was May 24th. But your company had paid for these waterfalls in February. Is that correct, based on the documents you've seen?
Yes.
And you didn't get your waterfalls, correct? So you contacted Mr. Merritt, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And when you contacted Mr. Merritt, and the reason you sent him money is because Mr. Merritt said, I don't have any money for these water fountains. No one gave me any money to build these waterfalls. Do you remember him telling you that?
No.
Okay. But you did send him additional funds, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And eventually, somebody from your company went or came to California, picked up the waterfall, and drove it back to Ohio.
That is correct.
Okay. So the waterfall ultimately got delivered and was built, correct?
No.
It wasn't, what did you
Was
pick
not
up?
built.
What was picked up?
Pieces and parts of the water feature were brought back to Ohio, and we engaged an electrician and a plumber to put them together.
To finish it?
Yes.
Okay. But it was in some stage of construction?
Yes.
Okay. And it was taken back to Ohio and, I guess, put in the building? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
I'm gonna guess June-ish. I don't remember the exact date.
Now, the state that the waterfall was in, whatever, whether it was 50% completed, 25% completed, or 75% completed, whatever stage that was, who did that work? Do you know?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Do you recall a videotape that was sent of a completed waterfall?
No.
So when you talked to Jeff Martin, did he not tell you about a YouTube video about a YouTube video of a completed waterfall?
Objection, hearsay.
Oh, yes, or no.
No.
Okay. And do you know how these waterfalls are shipped? Do you know that they're taken apart after that videotape is made and then shipped in crates?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
Nothing further.
Yes. When you were just answering some questions, you indicated the first time that you heard from the defendant or you spoke with him was on May 24th. Do you recall saying that?
Yes.
Do you recall getting an email from him actually around May 10th?
I know there were correspondence back and forth.
Would it refresh your recollection to
Yes.
look at that portion?
Yes.
just read the line that's underlined, just that sentence?
Yes. She has emailed.
Not out loud, you have to
Okay.
read it to yourself,
Okay.
sorry.
Yes, I emailed him on May 10th.
And what was the substance of that email?
That's when he told me that the crates were ready, or the water features were ready, and they weren't ready.
So he told you they were done, right?
Yes.
And they were crated,
Yes,
ready for pickup?
yes,
And that's not the condition they were in when your boss sent somebody to pick them up, is that correct?
that is my understanding.
Objection, foundation.
Overruled, answering me.
Why did you send additional money to the defendant if he told you that the fountains were already done?
At that point, Jeff Martin, my boss, just wanted the water features. It was holding us finishing the building.
Okay.
So they paid extra just to get them here.
Now, you had said something, and defense counsel didn't let you finish what you were saying about your conversation with Chase with respect to the fountains. Do you recall what it was that you were going to say, or your conversations with the defendant about the fountains?
I'm not sure.
Okay. You were being asked about your knowledge. Well, I'll withdraw the question. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Yes. When you contacted Mr. Merritt, did you know that Mr. Merritt was a separate entity aside from Earth-inspired products?
Objection, speculation, assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled, and she can answer if she knows.
No,
So you have no idea what the financial arrangement was between Earth-inspired products and Chase Merritt, do you? You have no idea
Objection,
regarding that.
speculation.
Sustained.
After your testimony was that you get involved when there's a problem, correct? With the subcontractor?
yes,
Would it be fair to say that before you contacted Chase Merritt, you had been contacting someone else at Earth-inspired products, correct?
yes.
Who was that?
I was going through the emails that in the contact information on their website.
And that, do you recall speaking with the Dan Kavanaugh?
I do know I spoke with him. I believe I spoke with him after I spoke with Chase.
So the first time you contacted anyone about the waterfalls was Chase Merritt?
I probably called every number on their page, emailed whoever I could just to get a hold of somebody.
You spoke to Dan Kavanaugh and Susan Blake as well, correct? Both of those individuals?
I did.
And both of those individuals you spoke with prior to speaking with Mr. Merritt or after, do you recall?
I don't think I talked to either one of them before I talked to Chase Merritt.
Well, sorry to do this to you. Have you refreshes your memory as to what you told the detective?
Okay.
Did you not tell the detective that you sent the money to Dan Kavanaugh? And you can look at that first. Well, you can look at the.
I didn't send any money. That was not part of what I did.
I'm just asking if you told the detective that, if that refreshes your memory.
Objection, hearsay. Lacks foundation.
Sustained as Tracy, you've asked her to review the report, so that refreshes the recollection.
Does this refresh your recollection as to what you told the detective?
I said they being my company,
Right.
sent the money.
To who?
Objection, hearsay.
I'm asking what you told the detective.
Well, yeah, what you told the detective is irrelevant. What's relevant is she has any recollection as to where any of the funds were actually sent.
Okay. Do you recall, does that refresh your memory as to where the funds were sent?
Like I said, I wasn't part of that. I don't know where they sent.
I understand.
I read the invoice, I read the receipt.
Was your memory fresher regarding the incident back in when you were interviewed by Detective Dugal?
Well, I'm quite sure it was 2010 back then.
Okay. So what you told the detective then would have probably been fresher in your mind as opposed to 2019, right?
Yes, and what I read, I had all the paperwork in front of me. The two architects handed me the information for me to get a hold of somebody and take care of this. So what I gave them was the information I had.
Okay, so you're doing the best you can to be honest and truthful with the detective, correct?
That is correct.
And does that statement that counsel showed you earlier regarding your interview with the detective, does that refresh your memory as to where the money was sent for the waterfalls?
Objection asked and answered.
Overruled, she can answer.
I read what was on the invoice and the receipts, and that's the information I gave the detective.
So, and what information did you give the detective?
Objection, hearsay.
Uh,
She doesn't have personal knowledge, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Well, you told the detective something back then as to where the money was sent, right?
I told the detective that according to the invoice and the receipt, the money was sent to Dan.
Objection, hearsay, lacks personal knowledge. Move to strike.
Overruled, the invoices then basically utilized as a business record, so she can indicate what those records show.
Thank you, Your Honor. So you told Detective DeGaulle that they, meaning the company, sent the $12,000 for the waterfalls to Dan Kavanaugh, is that
Objection,
correct?
misstates the testimony.
Overruled, she can answer if that's correct or not.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Madam Clerk.
I just need to clear something up.
Sure.
Looking at invoice 769, which is the invoice that you received from Earth Inspired Products. This invoice shows a payment, is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, the payment is only $6,250, not the full $12,007.
That is
I
correct.
can read that. It's not the full 12,000.
$750.
Right, so it's $6,250 that was,
Yes.
you were reading off of the paperwork, is that correct?
Yes.
So when counsel asked you before if you paid $12,750 to Dan Kavanaugh, what you were referring to was this invoice, is that
Yes,
correct?
the deposit, yes.
So this invoice actually only says $6,250, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you don't know where the other money was sent, would that be right?
That's correct.
Nothing further.
Anything else?
When you talked to the detective, all the money for the waterfall had been paid, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, and you told him that the money was sent to Dan Kavanaugh, correct?
Objection misstates the testimony.
Overruled, she can answer if that's correct.
I don't know where the money went. I have no idea.
Then why'd you tell the detective that they wired the money to Dan Kavanaugh?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
You don't remember telling the detective that we sent half to Dan Kavanaugh and half somewhere else, do you?
No, I don't.
Okay. And as far as you knew, at the time, your company had sent the $12,000 to Dan Kavanaugh. That's what your knowledge was at the time that you spoke to the detective, correct?
Objection misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
Nothing further.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Any objection to Ms. Huffman being excused?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
attendance and your excuse. And you can call your next witness.
Call Jeff Martin.
Do you solemnly state that evidence you'll give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Have a seat. You state your full name, spell it for the record.
Jeffrey Martin, Jeffrey-Martin.
Okay, great. See,
Thank you. What is your current employment?
Geis Construction.
And what's your position with Geis Construction?
I'm the president of the company,
How long have you been employed by Geis Construction?
22 years.
How long have you been the president of the company?
About 12.
And tell us a little bit about what Geist Construction does.
We're a design builder. We design and build commercial and industrial facilities.
I'm sorry, condition.
Commercial and industrial facilities.
Now, as the president of the company, do you actually oversee the projects?
Yes,
And does your company keep records of prior projects that were completed?
we do.
And how long do you actually keep records for?
7 to 10 years probably.
And you were asked in December of last year to find any records that you could related to a particular project. Do you recall that?
Yes,
Would it be fair to say this is quite some time after the project was done, since that project was done in 2010?
it's been a while, yes.
Do you know if all the records that you were able to find was the complete set of records related to that?
I think that was almost everything that would have been related to that project.
Now, with respect to projects, does somebody within your company actually have to approve purchases?
Yes.
Who does that?
Usually project managers, and then depending on the project and the nature of the purchase, I get involved.
So it's your job to oversee that as well?
Yes.
Now, do you recall a particular project that was being built in 2010 with respect to a couple of fountains?
Yes.
Do you know who those fountains were ordered from?
The EIC or EPC, I don't know exactly.
EIP, sound familiar?
That's it,
Okay.
correct.
Now, to your knowledge, were the waterfalls that were being requested, were they fully paid for?
We did. We paid 50% down payment and then a final payment.
And do you know, you indicated you paid a 50% down payment and then a final payment. Do you know where those funds actually went or who they were paid to?
Well, they were paid to the company.
I'm going to show you a couple of invoices, 768 and 769. Do you recognize these two particular documents?
Yes, these are this is the quote and the initial invoice for the fountains and then the 50% down payment receipt.
Okay, so the 769, which was the first one we were talking about, you indicated that was the actual quote that your company received.
Correct.
Now, on this particular quote, we see a date of February 2nd. Do you recall if the conversations regarding the fountains had started prior to that?
Well, I'm sure they had because the designer at my company would have been providing architectural direction and they needed something to be able to prepare the quote. So I'm sure there was conversation before that first invoice.
And is it your understanding, you indicated that 50% would have had to have been paid first prior to any work being started on the fountains?
Correct.
And then showing you what's been marked as 768, you indicated that your company had paid 50%. And then if you can tell us, is this a receipt for the actual payment, not another invoice, but the receipt for the payment?
That's the receipt for the first payment.
Now, in the documents that you sent, do you know if you were able to find a receipt for the second payment that your company made?
No, I don't think we were able to find that.
At some point, do you recall getting an email or having contact with somebody by the name of Charles Merritt?
Yes.
What was that contact about?
We were having difficulty getting the fountains. We were on a project that there was an end date in May or June of that year, and we had worked these things into the sequence, and we weren't getting answers to phone calls, and the fountains were late. So I called Mr. Merritt.
And to your knowledge, did your company send additional funds to Mr. Merritt?
We did.
And I'm going to show you a couple of exhibits, 770 and 771, and ask you if you recognize these, and then we can put them on the overhead. Do you recognize those documents?
I do.
Starting with 771, You indicated that you had been contacted by Mr. Merritt about additional funds. Can you tell us what this is?
This was, I guess, documentation of the arrangements I made to try and get these fountains moving out of where they were at and in my possession. We were asked to send additional funds.
Did your company send those funds?
No, we did.
And one of those checks you were asked to make out was actually to a Catherine Jarvis. Do you recall that?
I do remember that, yeah, it says that on the screen too.
Okay. Now, after your company paid these additional funds, do you recall actually receiving the fountains?
No, we continued to have difficulties getting the fountains.
And who was your contact with at that time with respect to trying to get the fountains?
My conversation was with Mr. Merritt. I had other people in the office that were, I'm sure, talking to him, maybe somebody on the shop floor.
Speculation.
Overruled.
Did you actually eventually get the fountains?
We did. We ended up having to send one of my superintendents out with a truck and a check to get the fountains on the truck and bring them back to Ohio.
I'm going to show you 770. Now, you indicated that you had to send a check with somebody that came out to pick those up. Do you recall that?
I do.
And can you tell us what this is?
Well, that looks like the check that we sent June 10th.
So this would be an additional check for $4,000 that was to Mr. Merritt. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, can you tell us when you came and picked or when you sent someone to come and pick the fountains up, what kind of condition were the fountains in?
They were not assembled. We brought pieces and parts back to Ohio.
And when you brought the pieces and parts back, what did you end up doing with those?
We had to hire an electrical contractor to complete the wiring and a plumber to finish putting the pieces together before we could install them.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as 772 and ask you if you recognize this.
Yes.
Now, you indicated that you had additional expenses associated with the fountains. Is that right?
Correct.
And if you could tell us in this particular document, 772, what this is.
J.L. Taylor is an electrical contractor that we use in Ohio. He sent me a bill for putting the fountains, completing electrical wiring in the fountains.
Okay. And I know we spoke earlier that you didn't have all of the documentation. Is it your memory that you had additional expenses related to the plumbing and things of that nature to get the fountains put together?
Yes.
Did you ever contact Mr. Merritt to attempt or file a lawsuit against Mr. Merritt to attempt to recoup your funds?
I did not.
Do you know when those initial invoices that we talked about, there was one that had a date of February 2nd. Do you know when you actually received those invoices?
No, I don't know.
I have nothing further at this time.
Cost?
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. The first contact that you had regarding these fountains, do you recall who that was with?
My first contact?
Yes.
I think my first contact was with Mr. Merritt when we decided we were just having so much difficulty getting the fountains. I got involved.
And do you know who had, with your company, who's the one that, I guess, made the deal with Earth-inspired products?
Well, Christina Martini was our interior design person that probably spec'd and got the pricing, and then I would have approved the price, and then they would have followed up on the actual deal to get the thing built and sent.
And this would have all been done prior to these statements that counsel shows you, correct? Because you said conversations would have had to have occurred,
Yeah,
correct?
there would have to have been some design and pricing exercise before they would have arrived at the price.
In fact, I'm gonna show you Exhibit 769, the one that you looked at earlier, which you termed was I think you may have said this was a bid or something of that nature.
Well, it would have been the initial invoice for the two fountains that we were trying to buy.
Okay, and it's addressed to somebody, correct? I think it's the name you just mentioned.
Yeah, Christina Martini. She's was an interior designer at the time for us. She's no longer with us.
Okay, but that would be the person that would have, at least based on your knowledge of how your company works, would have had the contact with Earth-Inspired Products?
Correct.
Okay, and that person would have done, Ms. Martini would have done the, I guess, the work related to getting this first initial invoice to your company, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so, do you know who she was in contact with at Earth-Inspired Products?
I don't.
Were you aware that Mr. Merritt, the person that you were speaking with, and that was sometime later, correct?
Correct.
That he is not an employee of Earth-Inspired Products?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence.
Objection sustained calls for speculation by this witness.
Do you know what Mr. Merritt's relationship was with Earth-Inspired Products?
Objection speculation.
Overruled answer if he has a basis.
The conversation I had with Mr. Merritt indicated he was a partner.
A partner with Earth-Inspired Products?
Yes.
And why would you make the check out then to Charles Merritt as opposed to Earth-Inspired Products or the company?
The conversation I had with him went along the lines of, I'm not getting paid. If you want my help on this, I need you to pay me to move these fountains along.
Right.
And you were also shown 768, Exhibit 768, which we're going to put up on the screen as well. Actually, let's see. We'll keep 769. I'm going to have you take a look at the bottom of this exhibit, 769. And I'm going to try to blow that up a little bit to see if it'll be easier for you to read. And do you recall sending the money to a Daniel Kavanaugh?
No, I don't recall that.
That's not something that you'd be involved in?
No, not at that point.
So you don't know where the $12,000 was sent, correct?
I don't, as I sit here, I don't know.
Okay. And you don't know whether Mr. Merritt got any of that $12,000 to build your waterfalls, do you? You would not have any knowledge of that, would you?
I would not have any knowledge of that other than his conversation with me that said that he wasn't getting paid.
So in his conversation with you, which was, do you recall when that was?
I can't give you a specific date. It was sometime between the invoice, our down payment, and that other exhibit that was the send me the money.
Okay. So would it have been after Miss Heckaman, Susan Heckaman would have contacted Earth-Inspired Products, or would it have been before?
I'm sure that it was after Susan had conversations with Mr. Merritt and Earth Inspired, and it finally got to my desk as an ongoing issue.
So usually the president's the last one to deal with the issue.
Correct.
Okay. So it was sometime later, and your conversations with Mr. Merritt went something like Mr. Merritt telling you, hey, I haven't got any money on this. If you want me to build your waterfalls, you need to send me some money, correct?
More or less, yes.
And ultimately, after you spoke with Mr. Merritt, you got your waterfalls, correct? Albeit in pieces.
Yeah, we drove there and got them. and brought them back to Ohio.
Okay. And council showed you a check for $4,000, correct?
Yes.
And there was an additional amount of money sent to Mr. Merritt as well? $2,000, I believe?
Correct, well, yes, even that exhibit
Correct.
explains to it too.
So as far as you know, there was a total of $6,000 sent to Mr. Merritt, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And you don't know, as you testified before, that previous $12,000, if any of that was paid to Mr. Merritt. You don't know that, do
I
you?
don't know that, no.
Okay. You said there was a 50% deposit initially sent, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, are you familiar, obviously you're the president, so you must be familiar with who you bank with?
Oh, okay. Could be.
I'm asking. I'm asking. And if you wire transfer money from your bank, well, let me ask you, who were you banking with at the time?
I don't remember.
I'm going to show you a statement and see if this refreshes your memory. I'll give you a hint. It's the highlighted area at the bottom.
Well, First Merritt Bank, okay,
Was that the bank you banked with?
appears to be. We've done business with First Merritt.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you recall when the first 50% deposit was sent?
I'm assuming sometime between 2/2 and 2/23 when we got the receipt showing that we paid 50% down.
I'll have you take a look at that bank statement again. Does
2/19,
that refresh your memory?
well, it's what it says, I don't remember this detail.
Okay, but that's within that time range?
Yes,
Okay. Does that, looking at that wire transfer, does that look like a wire transfer that was sent from your company?
it says it originated with Geist Construction,
From First Merritt Bank?
yes.
Okay. And do you know who your company, does that document refresh your memory as to who the money was sent to?
No,
If you look at the top?
at the top it says Daniel B. Kavanaugh. I don't remember that fact.
Now that was the 50% deposit, correct?
Correct.
All right. Do you know when the balance was paid?
I don't.
I assume you don't know to whom either, correct?
I wouldn't know that.
Okay. Who would have those records? Is that something that your company would normally
The
keep?
banking details, I doubt we keep details of construction.
Okay. Fair enough. Now, do you recall watching a YouTube video of the completed waterfall?
Maybe.
Have you dealt with a lot of waterfalls? I imagine you,
2 in my life.
2 in your entire...
Yeah, 2
So
projects. Not that common.
It's not that common.
Not in
So,
Ohio.
would it be fair to say that you're not very familiar with how waterfalls are built and then ultimately shipped to the end user?
It's probably a fair statement. I pay people to bring me a waterfall and put it in the building.
As you should. You're the president, right? So that's the way it works. Okay. Thank you very much.
So I just want to ask you a couple more questions. I'm going to show you Exhibit 438, which I believe is what council just showed you. Is this the record that you just looked at with respect to the $62.50 that your company paid?
Yes.
What is it again?
438? 438. Now, we heard that you actually got your fountains right, but would you kind of describe that term as being used loosely in terms of what you actually received?
Objection, speculation.
Yeah, we received non-working pieces and parts that had to be put together in the field. There was more field assembly than we anticipated.
And you indicated that you paid extra money. Do you recall there being a conversation, or did Susan tell you about a conversation she had with Mr. Merritt that the fountains were actually ready and crated and that you were paying additional money to have the fountains shipped?
I think that's one that came to my attention, that we heard they were ready, but it just wouldn't ship them.
And is that the condition that you actually received them in?
No.
Do you know how much your company actually paid for these fountains?
All together?
Yes.
Well, the 12 we started with, the 6 additional we paid, the 1,500 or so to my electrician, and there was a plumbing invoice that would have, I don't know how much it would be, but it was.
And you
an
paid for
additional
travel for somebody to come
Yeah, I
pick
had to
them
send
up?
my superintendent out, rented a truck, fuel costs, whatever was involved in
Okay, and then I'm gonna, do you recall if there's any other expenses that you had associated with the fountains?
that. Honestly, no.
Would it refresh your recollection to review a portion of the email that you had sent regarding the expenses?
Okay, Mike?
What exhibit?
It's not an exhibit. Does that refresh your recollection in terms of the expenses associated with the fountain?
Your Honor, can we have the page number she's having the witness read?
I'm sorry?
Can we have the page number she's having the witness read?
Sure.
I don't have the page number. It was sent in a small packet of discovery that we sent them. So I'll show it to them.
Show it to council
Sure.
first.
Yeah, so.
Hold on one second.
Sure.
Does that refresh your
Yeah,
recollection? Okay.
I mean, that's basically what I indicated. And
Were there any other additional expenses then that your company incurred with respect to the fountains?
Not that I'm aware of,
Okay.
other than general time spent trying to sort it out.
So the extra payment that you made, the $19.50 to to Catherine Jarvis, and then you paid an extra amount to Walker Metal, is that right?
I think that was on that exhibit that was there, I think it was 2,000 to Merritt, and the 1,900 and some change was to the Walker sheet metal.
And did you believe that that was for shipping of the fountains? To have them shipped?
I thought that's what it was going to take to get the fountains released, correct?
Okay. Well, let me show you the actual document, 771, with the date of May 24th. Does that refer to the payment of those funds to get, when it says at the top, does that refer to the payment of those funds to get the fountains shipped?
Yeah, he agreed to ship the fountains if
Okay.
we sent the 2,000 and the 1,950.
I have nothing further.
Anything else?
Just briefly. So, again, your contact was with Mr. Merritt way after everybody else in your company had already talked to whoever, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And do you recall at some point, I know I asked you about the YouTube video, at some point you saw a working waterfall, is that correct? By video?
Objection, this states his testimony.
Overruled, you can answer if that's correct or not.
I don't remember seeing, if you're asking if I saw a YouTube video of a fountain or the fountains.
The fountain.
I don't remember seeing a YouTube video of working fountains.
Okay. So, but you had a project manager, correct, on this?
I did.
Okay. And who was that?
I don't remember his name.
Okay. When, let's see, it would be, when it was ultimately, you sent somebody out to come and get it, correct? You said it was in different pieces, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. How big was the waterfall once it was installed? Is it a big waterfall? Like, we're looking at the wall behind you. I mean, is it?
They were about 6 feet wide and about 10 feet tall each.
Were you aware that it's customary to, once the waterfall is completed and shown to the customer, then it's broken down and some way and crated and then shipped to the ultimate user. Were you aware that that was the process by which waterfalls are completed?
Objection, Foundation.
Sustained also since that's not known.
Did your project manager talk to you about how the shipping was going to occur?
I don't remember.
You were just, because your job is just give me the waterfall because we got this building we got to finish.
Pretty much, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
So, in looking at the exhibits that we looked at, there was initially a $6,250 deposit, correct?
Correct.
And that was sent to Earth Inspired Products. Is
That's
that
my
right?
recollection, correct.
Okay. You don't know who at Earth Inspired Products it was sent to, no?
I don't.
Okay. Then there was a $2,000 payment that Mr. Merritt requested to Catherine Jarvis.
Correct.
And then there was a $4,000 payment to Mr. Merritt upon the pickup of the fountains.
Correct.
And then there was a $1,950 payment to Walker Sheet Metal.
Correct.
Okay. Other than those, are you aware of any other payments for those two fountains?
Other than to my subcontractors once we got them, or no?
To
That's,
anyone involved in Earth Inspired
I
Products?
don't know any other payments.
Okay. Did you ever have any conversations with Daniel Kavanaugh?
I don't remember having any conversations.
Do you recall either Mr. Merritt or anyone else referring you to Daniel Kavanaugh regarding the fountains?
I don't remember that.
Okay. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Just briefly. When you contacted Mr. Merritt, was it your understanding that the entire $12,000 had been paid?
Yes.
So before you sent Mr. Merritt $1, your company had already spent the $12,000, correct?
Correct.
But we just don't know right now where that second $6,250 was sent, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Nothing
Yeah.
further.
Any objections to Mr. Martin being excused?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir, for your attendance and your excuse. Make sure you don't take any of our exhibits with you. And we call your next witness.
Your Honor, would this be a good time to actually take our morning break?
It would, I guess. We'll go ahead and take our morning recess, 15 minutes. Keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, or allow anyone to discuss the case with you in your presence. Again, that means not discussing anything about the case, witnesses, testimony, exhibits, parties, or attorneys. We'll see everyone back in about 15 minutes.